This is one of the coldest betrayals I've ever covered. Get this trash out of my hall, James Anderson says, before she ruins my shot. He doesn't even lower his voice. 200 elite guests stare at the marble floor instead of at him. Mary Thompson stands there, coat thin, spine straight. She holds a folder that could end everything he owns. She says nothing. She waits. A silver drive sits in her pocket. Quiet, patient, lethal. In 10 minutes, this $100,000 wedding collapses in front of everyone who stayed silent. If a room of powerful people ever chose comfort over you, stay with me. Mary's revenge rewrites who holds the power here. Subscribe if silence should never win. No one saw it coming. Humiliation hit a perfect trap. Let's watch it play out.
No one saw it coming. Humiliation hit a perfect trap. Let's watch it play out.
Get this trash out of my sight before she ruins my photographs. James Anderson snapped the words across the marble floor, straightening his tuxedo lapel. 200 guests stared down at the cold stone tiles instead of at him. Mary Thompson had come only to deliver the final server logs the court had ordered. "Throw it there and get out," he said. "You look like a maid." Patricia Wells laughed, soft and easy. "Don't be cruel, darling. She's the reason we have all this." The crowd looked away, complicit in their silence. They let the groom grind down the woman who had burned her youth for him. Mary did not scream. She only smoothed the collar of her old coat. But the arrogant man in the tailored tuxedo had no idea. The silver drive in her pocket was about to burn his wedding to the ground. Mary Thompson was 34 years old. Once a software engineer, now she took any job that paid in cash. Her coat had cost $40 9 years ago. It was still the only winter coat she owned. James Anderson was 38, chief executive now of a company that used to be half hers. His tuxedo had cost $100,000. He wore it like a medal. The Grand Plaza ballroom smelled of roses and heavy perfume thick enough to taste. Crystal chandeliers threw gold light across marble that had never known a scuff. 200 guests stood in small clusters, champagne glasses catching the light. Mary walked in carrying a thin folder. Inside were the final server logs, notarized, time-stamped, legally binding. She had not come for the wedding. She had come because a judge told her to. The floor beneath her shoes was polished to a mirror shine. Her shoes were not. The soles had worn thin at the heel, patched twice with the wrong glue. No one in that room owned shoes like hers. James saw her first. His jaw tightened. He crossed the floor 6 long strides, deliberate. Each one performed for the room. "Get this trash out of my sight," he said, "before she ruins my photographs." He straightened his lapel. Slowly, the string quartet in the corner lost its rhythm and stopped. "I'm here to deliver the final server logs," James Mary said. The court required it. "Throw it there and get out." His voice stayed calm, rehearsed, almost gentle. "You look like a maid." Patricia Wells stepped closer, her $15,000 gown whispering against the floor. "Don't be cruel, darling," she said, smiling. "She's the reason we have all this. Not a warning, not an apology. Just another blade wrapped in silk." Sarah Mitchell stood among the bridesmaids near the far column. She bit down on her lip until it paled. She said nothing. She had said nothing for 3 years. Her $1,500 dress fit her perfectly. Her hands did not. They twisted the fabric at her side over and over. A small, quiet motion no one else was watching for. Mary did not flinch. She did not raise her voice. She stood there silent, steady still. She smoothed the collar of her coat, the same coat, worn thin at the elbows. The 4th button stitched back with the wrong thread. 200 guests watched her the way people watch a car accident, close enough to see, too far to help. James smiled at his guests, pleased with himself. He reached for the champagne glass a waiter offered him. He did not look at Mary again. He did not need to, not yet. Mary turned toward the bridal party as if to hand over the ceremony schedule. She walked 6 steps. She stopped in front of Sarah. "Your schedule." Mary said, voice flat, folder extended. Sarah's fingers brushed hers. Something small and cold slid between their palms. A silver drive no bigger than a thumb. 5 minutes. That's all it took. Sarah's hand closed around it. Her eyes did not move from Mary's face. Calm, unreadable, distant, not entirely afraid anymore. No one saw it happen. No one was meant to. Mary stepped back, calm, composed. She handed the folder of server logs to the hotel's event manager instead. He signed for it without a word. James never looked away from his reflection in the ballroom mirror. He never noticed the drive change hands. He never noticed Sarah's fingers curl tight around something that was not a schedule. He believed the woman in the frayed coat had nothing left to give. He believed the 200 guests, the roses, the chandeliers belonged to him. He believed the whole gleaming room was proof he had already won. Not power, not control, just an illusion standing in a $100,000 tuxedo. No one moved, no one spoke, but the blade was already at his throat. 3 years earlier, Mary Thompson was 31 years old. She lived in a one-room apartment above a laundromat, the kind of cold that lived in the walls year-round. The heater rattled instead of running. Frost formed on the inside of the window by January. She kept a blanket over her knees while she worked, even in the kitchen, at the small folding table with one leg shorter than the others. She worked 3 jobs then, cashier by morning, waitress by evening. After midnight, the only job that mattered, the one nobody paid her for yet. She wrote code until her eyes burned. Her hands cramped around the keyboard, fingers stiff from the cold. Typing thousands of lines before dawn, more nights than she could count. $11.50 an hour twice over some weeks. 19 hours awake some nights, 4 hours of sleep if she was lucky. Curled under one blanket, the laptop still warm beside her. She did not complain. She had learned young and early that complaining changed nothing. It only cost her energy she needed to keep going. James Anderson was 35 then. Charming in the way men are charming when they need something from you. He called the algorithm brilliant. He called her tireless. He called her his. Not love, not partnership. Just a word for what he planned to take. She built the fraud detection engine alone. 6 months of nights in a kitchen with one working burner. He signed the papers. He shook the hands. He wore the credit like a coat that was never his. He stood in front of rooms full of men in tailored suits. He spoke of vision, of instinct, of a rare gift. A gift for spotting talent before anyone else could. He never once said her name. When the investors came, they came fast. $4.2 million wired in a single afternoon. James smiled for every camera in the room. He raised a glass. He toasted himself. Mary kept working. She did not ask for a title. She did not ask for her name on the filing. She asked only for access to the servers she had built with her own hands. Overzealous James told her once, smiling, "That's what I'd call your grip on those admin credentials. Better if I handle security going forward, not a request." A decision already made, dressed up as a favor. She did not fight it that morning. She trusted him still. The way you trust a house you built with your own 2 hands. The way you trust it not to fall on you while you sleep. At 6:14 in the morning, 3 weeks later, her access was gone. No warning, no message, just a login screen that no longer recognized her name. She tried again at 7. She tried again at noon. By evening, she understood the truth the screen had already told her. By noon that same day, the papers arrived. Divorce filed the same week the funding closed. By evening, a moving truck sat outside her apartment, though nothing there was worth moving. She signed what they told her to sign. She had no lawyer, no leverage, no proof. Only the code itself sitting silent inside servers she could no longer reach. James Anderson kept the company. He kept the code. He kept the $4.2 million and every dollar that followed after it. Mary Thompson kept the coat. She wore it walking out of that apartment for the last time. Arms empty, chin level, eyes dry. She had already spent every tear she owned, spent them on a man who never once deserved them. Not weakness, not defeat, just a woman doing the math on what was left. For 3 years after that, she rebuilt herself, one cash job at a time. James Anderson rose in magazines and headlines, praised for genius that was never his. She read one of those articles once standing in a checkout line on her break. She put the magazine back on the rack. She did not buy it. Her hands still remembered the cold of that apartment. Steady, calloused patient. They wrapped themselves around a paper coffee cup instead. Cheap bitter, hot enough to sting. The code still ran inside his company's servers. Silent, patient waiting. Somewhere in those lines was proof buried under his name. The fortune he wore like a medal had her fingerprints all over it. How do you prove a fortune was built by hands no one bothered to credit? How do you prove 3 years of nights? Prove it to a world that never asked to see them. Her silence was never submission. It was a countdown, ticking quietly under a coat no one thought twice to look at. Back in the present, the Grand Plaza ballroom had not stopped moving. Mary Thompson stood near the reception table. She waited on a signed receipt for the folder she had already delivered. The event manager had stepped away to find his pen. Mary waited. She had learned patience the hard way. 3 years of it, one cash job at a time, one long shift after another. David Foster was 36 years old, the best man. The kind of man who filled a room with noise instead of substance. His velvet loafers had cost $600. He wore them like they made him interesting. He drifted toward her, champagne in hand, grinning at nothing in particular. He circled once before he spoke. "The way men do when they want an audience first." "Nice shoes," he said, glancing down at hers. "Did you walk here from a shelter?" Mary's shoes had been resold twice. $22 secondhand from a store 3 blocks from her apartment. She said nothing. And that sleeve, David went on. "Is that a hole? Or is it just very committed to the vintage look?" The frayed cuff of her coat had worn through at the seam. She had meant to mend it for months. There had never been enough time or enough thread to spare. 200 guests stood near enough to hear every word. They sipped champagne instead. Bubbles caught the chandelier light while they looked somewhere else entirely. Not disgust, not discomfort, just the practiced blankness of people protecting their own seat at the table. One older man near the ice sculpture glanced down at his own shoes. Polished, expensive, untouched by anything close to hard work. He looked away fast, back to his drink, back to safety. A woman beside him laughed too loudly at something David had said. Her laughter did not reach her eyes. It never does when the joke costs someone else the room. Mary planted her shoes on the marble. She did not move toward the door. She did not move at all. "I'm waiting for a signature," she said, voice flat. "For the documents I delivered." "Sure you are," David said, laughing. Sure. Let's get you somewhere less visible while you wait, though." He stepped into her path. His shoulders were wide, blocking the route toward the coat room. 200 pounds of tailored suit standing between her and the door. Mary did not step back. Her eyes stayed level, cold, unreadable, fixed on a man who had nothing behind his smile. "Come on," he said. "This isn't a good look for the pictures." "Not a good look," Mary repeated flat. "Neither is what you just said to me. But here we are." David's grin faltered for half a second. It came back wider, louder, performed for the small crowd gathering near the bar. He laughed again, too hard at his own joke. Behind him, a waiter refilled glasses without looking up. He had seen this before. He would see it again before the night was over. The champagne kept flowing. Glasses touched glasses in soft, expensive clinks. Somewhere near the string quartet, a woman in a gold gown laughed. Had nothing to do with Mary at all. No one stepped forward. No one said her name. No one asked if she needed help finding the door. Sarah Mitchell was not in this room tonight, kept somewhere behind the bridal party doors. Even those who were here had learned the same lesson she had. Silence bought safety for a while. Safety bought nothing back, not in the end. 200 people, and not one of them moved. Mary held her ground for 11 long seconds. She counted them without meaning to. It was a habit now built from 3 years with nothing else to hold on to. The event manager returned at last, pen in hand, apologizing for the wait. He signed the receipt. He handed her the copy without once looking at her shoes. David stepped aside only then, mock bowing. He swept one arm toward the door, like a man granting a favor no one had asked for. Mary walked past him without a word. She did not look back at the ballroom. She did not need to. Behind her, the room returned to its noise. Glasses, laughter, the low hum of 200 conversations. All of it had already forgotten she existed. The marble floor gleamed under the chandeliers, polished, flawless, without a single mark on it. The people standing on it were not so clean. Somewhere in that crowd was there one person left who remembered what conscience cost, and whether they were still willing to pay it. The floor stayed bright, spotless, untouched. Those standing on it had rotted from somewhere no polish could ever reach.
A $15,000 dress sweeps proudly past. A cheap, worn-out coat. It's sickening to watch. A shameless thief. Flaunt her stolen luxury in front of the person who built it. If it were me, I could never hold that cold, perfect mask. Together. Imagine standing in that marble hall watching your old best friend wear your own life like it's hers. That kind of cruelty is truly too much to bear.
Patricia Wells arrived like a queen taking a room she already owned. Bridesmaids trailed behind her. The whole cluster glowed with the shine of people who never worried about rent. Patricia Wells was 31 years old, James Anderson's bride. Her wedding gown had cost $60,000. She wore it the way some women wear certainty. She and Mary had been friends once, 11 years of it. Roommates once in a dorm too small for 2 beds, before money came between them and picked a side. "Look who's still here," Patricia said, smiling wide for the small crowd gathering near her. "I thought security would have handled this by now." Mary said nothing. She stood with the same flat calm she had carried all evening, hands folded, coat sleeves worn thin at the cuffs. You know, Patricia went on twirling slightly so her gown caught the light. "James bought me this ring with money from the company you two built. Isn't that funny?" 2.1 carats, she added, holding her hand up for no one in particular. Worth more than most people's cars. A few bridesmaids leaned in to admire it, murmuring the right words at the right volume. One of them touched the ring for exactly 3 seconds. Careful, reverent, the way people touch things that are not theirs. Sarah Mitchell stood near the edge of the bridal party listening, her stomach turned with every word Patricia said. The disgust in her eyes had started as guilt. Guilt was curdling into something sharper now. Patricia turned back to Mary, delight settling into her voice. Like a costume she wore well. "You have to admit," she said, "James and I really are perfect for each other." She waited for Mary to agree. The way she used to wait back in that small dorm room. Back when agreement came easy and cost nothing at all. A match made somewhere, Mary said, flat even. Heaven's not the word I'd use. Patricia laughed too loud. The sound bounced off marble that had never known a scuff. She did not catch the edge in Mary's voice. She rarely caught anything that wasn't handed to her directly. "Since you're here anyway," Patricia said, "why not make yourself useful? Lift my train for the photographer. You used to be good at helping me with things." It was not a request, not really. It was a small, calculated cruelty dressed up as convenience, timed for the cameras already turning toward them. The photographer raised his lens slowly. 200 guests turned to watch. Sarah's hands tightened at her sides, knuckles pale against the fabric of her dress. "No," Mary said. Just the one-word flat final without heat behind it. Patricia's smile flickered just slightly, the first crack in a performance built for an audience that had stopped paying attention. She had expected obedience. She had built her whole life on people giving her exactly that. "I don't do that anymore," Mary added. "Not for you, not for anyone in this room." The photographer lowered his camera, unsure what to shoot now. A few guests exchanged glances instead of champagne. Someone near the back set their glass down without finishing it. The first flicker of discomfort passed through the crowd like a draft under a door. Patricia's laugh came again, thinner, this time quieter, less certain of its own sound than before. She looked around for the crowd to back her the way she always had. She found only silence waiting instead. Sarah watched the whole exchange without a word. She had spent 3 years defending her brother's choices. She had told herself silence was loyalty. Tonight, the math was not adding up the way it used to. She remembered a photograph from years ago. 3 girls on a dorm room floor, pizza boxes stacked in the corner, Mary laughing with her whole face. That was before anyone in the picture learned to calculate what a person was worth. Somewhere behind her ribs, something shifted, small and quiet the way ice shifts before it finally cracks all the way through. Patricia's borrowed glow depended on rooms like this one, rooms full of people willing to applaud whatever she said. That glow was thinner than she knew, worn at the edges the way cheap gold wears down to reveal the metal underneath. $60,000 of silk and lace. None of it could buy her the one thing she needed tonight. A single friend left in the room. They believed Mary had already broken quiet and defeated, easy to step over on the way to the altar. They were the ones standing on glass that had already started to crack, quietly, thinly beneath their own polished heels, right where none of them thought to look. The wedding procession began lining up near the far doors. Music swelled from the string quartet, tighter now, pressed with something like urgency. James Anderson turned slowly to check the room one last time. He froze when he saw her. Mary Thompson still stood near the reception table, exactly where she had stood all night, a ghost in the middle of his triumph. Still silent, patient, unwilling to be moved by anything short of a signature already given. He crossed the marble floor, faster, angrier than before. His jaw was tight before he even reached her. This time there was no smile prepared for the cameras. "What is it going to take," he said low and sharp, "for you to understand you are not welcome here?" 200 guests turned toward them all at once without a sound. No one spoke. No one moved closer. They formed a loose circle instead, a silent ring closing in around the center of the room. Mary stood inside that circle alone. She did not step back. "You already have your signature," James said flat, cold. "You already have your receipt. What more do you want from me?" "Nothing," Mary said. "Just what's owed, nothing more." He stepped closer at that. He closed the space between them until his shadow fell across her shoulders. She could smell his cologne now. Thick, expensive, the same brand he had worn for years. Mary held his gaze. She did not blink. Not once. Not for the whole 10 seconds he stood there, waiting. Waiting for her eyes to drop first. They didn't. Her pulse had not changed. She had checked silently the way she checked everything now, counting the beat of her own heart against the sound of the quartet. James's jaw flexed. He leaned in another inch, slowly, deliberately, the way a man moves when he wants an audience to notice. Close enough that a few guests near the front gasped, soft and quick. Hands rose to their mouths. "You think standing there makes you strong," he said. "It makes you pathetic. It makes you a woman who can't accept that her time is over." Mary's voice came flat, even without a single crack. "My time isn't over, James. It just isn't yours to end anymore." Something in his face shifted, small, involuntary, gone before anyone could name it. He had expected her to shrink. Underdogs always shrank in his experience when a man like him leaned in this close. He had built an entire career on that shrinking, learning the exact angle of a shoulder, the exact volume of a voice that made most people fold without a fight. She did not shrink. She stood exactly as tall as she had all evening, spine straight, chin level. The frayed collar of her coat caught the chandelier light, the same way it always had. A woman with nothing left to lose does not know how to flinch anymore. There is nothing left inside her for fear to take hold of. Fear needs something to grip onto, a job to lose, a name to protect a future still worth guarding. She had none of those left in that room. There was nothing left in her for him to threaten. James's hand twitched at his side. Fingers curled once before he stopped himself. He was aware now of 200 eyes, watching him fail to move her an inch. A bead of sweat traced the line of his collar. He did not wipe it away. Calm, composed, controlled, that was the performance he still owed the room. Wiping it away would have meant admitting it was there. The room's temperature seemed to climb without a single window opening. Champagne glasses sat forgotten in hands that had gone still. Somewhere behind them, the string quartet lost its rhythm again. It did not find its way back. A waiter near the bar set down his tray without a sound, the way people do when they sense something about to break. 200 guests held their breath together, waiting to see which one of them would break first. Sarah Mitchell stood frozen near the bridal party. She watched her brother's shoulders lock rigid, a rage with nowhere left to go. She had seen that same rigid stance before, years ago, aimed at someone far smaller than her. Patricia Wells watched from near the altar doors, her smile gone thin, uncertain now of the man she had chosen to marry, in front of all these people watching. He wanted to watch her shatter, right there in front of everyone who mattered to him. He had built his whole life on watching people shatter and calling it strength. He forgot that bedrock does not yield, no matter how hard a man leans into it. No matter how long he stands there pretending he has already won. Mary Thompson felt the cold before she understood it. Red wine bloomed across her shoulder, thick and dark, tracing the collar of the only winter coat she owned. James Anderson stood 2 feet away, glass-tilted wrist still turned from the motion. A waiter had passed with a tray of Cabernet only seconds before, and James had lifted a glass from it without asking, without looking at the boy the way he lifted everything that wasn't his. The ballroom exhaled. 200 guests inhaled the same breath. At the same instant, a soft collective gasp swallowed by chandeliers and marble, and not one hand reached out. Not one voice rose above a whisper. Mary looked down at the stain first. It spread slow across the fabric, dark as something older than wine. Then she looked up. Her face gave him nothing. James laughed, a bright, practiced laugh, the kind built for rooms like this one, and he spread his hands toward the nearest cluster of guests as if inviting them into the joke. "Clumsy of me," he said, voice pitched for an audience of witnesses who wanted more than anything to believe him. "These old coats stain so easily, don't they? Cheap fabric never holds up." Somewhere near the string quartet, a woman in emerald silk turned her champagne flute in small, nervous circles and said nothing. A man in a tailored gray suit checked his watch, though the hour meant nothing to him. Sarah Mitchell stood among the bridesmaids in her expensive rented dress, and her fingers found the seam of her sleeve, and she pressed until the thread nearly gave. Mary did not step back. She let the wine run. It reached the hem, dripped once onto the marble, a small dark circle against all that polished white, and the sound of it landing was somehow louder than the music. James stepped closer now, testing the silence the way a man tests ice 1 foot at a time, watching for cracks. "You know," he said, softer, meant only for the small circle around them. "I always wondered how you'd hold up under real pressure. Turns out you just stand there, like furniture." A young caterer near the kitchen doors flinched at the word and busied himself with a tray that didn't need adjusting. Mary's eyes did not leave James Anderson's face. She had spent 3 years learning the exact geometry of it, the way his jaw tightened right before a lie, the way his left eyebrow rose a half degree when he thought he'd won something. She cataloged it now, filed it beside everything else she had already cataloged, the way she once filed server logs at 2 a.m, while he slept 12 feet away, dreaming of a company that would soon no longer feel like his. "Say something," James said. "Anything. Give them a show." She said nothing. The silence stretched taut, and somewhere behind Patricia Wells, a bridesmaid whispered something too low to carry, and another guest cleared his throat and no one moved toward the door, and no one moved toward Mary either. James's smile flickered just once at the edges. He had expected tears. He had built this moment brick by brick for tears, for the particular satisfaction of watching something break in public where breaking would matter, where it would be witnessed and therefore real. Instead, he got a woman standing in a ruined coat with wine sliding off her sleeve in slow red threads, watching him with the patience of someone who had already survived the worst thing he could do to her 3 years ago in a cold apartment he had never once visited. "Nothing to say," he said, and this time his voice cracked just barely under the weight of having to fill silence himself. "Of course not. There never is." He turned to the crowd again, arms wide, chasing the laugh he'd already lost. Nobody gave it to him this time. The quartet kept playing valiant and useless, filling the gap where laughter should have been. A server slipped past with a cloth, hesitated at Mary's side, glanced at James, and thought better of offering help in front of him. Sarah Mitchell's eyes were wet now, though she blinked hard and looked at the floor and said nothing, the way she had said nothing in Chapter 1. The way she had said nothing every single time before this. James set the empty glass down on a passing tray with more force than necessary. The crystal rang out a single hard note, and in that ring Mary heard something she recognized immediately. Not triumph. Panic dressed up as cruelty the way it always was with men like him. He had crossed a line tonight that words alone had never let him cross. And something in the room had shifted with it, quiet, irreversible, the way ice shifts before it breaks apart entirely. Mary reached down, wrung a fold of the ruined sleeve between 2 fingers, watched a last bead of wine fall to the marble. She said nothing still. But somewhere beneath the stained fabric against her ribs, the silver drive sat exactly where it had sat for days, waiting patient as she was. For the moment, the room would finally have no choice but to listen. James Anderson reached into his jacket and produced a folded napkin, monogrammed edges pressed sharp as a blade. The orchestra had shifted into its opening bars that low ceremonial swell meant to herd 200 bodies toward their seats, and still, he lingered. Still, he watched Mary Thompson standing in her ruined coat with the wine gone tacky along the hem. He unfolded the napkin slowly. Then he let it drop. It landed an inch from the toe of her shoe white against black marble, and for a moment nobody in the ballroom moved at all. Sarah Mitchell watched from the bridesmaids' line, her hands knotted in the satin of her dress, and something in her chest folded inward, the particular ache of watching a brother become a stranger in real time. She had grown up trailing behind. James had once believed the confidence in him was courage rather than hunger. Now she watched him tower over a woman half his size, and she understood with sudden and total clarity that she had spent years mistaking cruelty for charm. James tilted his head. "Pick it up," he said. Mary did not move. "I said pick it up." His voice had dropped into something quieter, now almost gentle, the tone men like him reserved for their cruelest instructions. "Clean up your mess before the ceremony starts. Wipe the floor, like a real maid would." The word landed and did not echo because the room had gone too still for echoes. 200 guests, frozen mid-breath, champagne flutes suspended halfway to lips that had forgotten how to drink. Mary's gaze did not drop to the napkin. It stayed fixed on him level, unblinking, the same gaze she had carried since the moment she walked through the ballroom doors, carrying a folder of documents that would end his life inside the hour. Somewhere behind her, a chair scraped against marble, someone shifting weight, someone almost rising and then not rising because rising meant becoming visible, and visibility in this room had a cost none of them were willing to pay yet. James crouched just slightly, bringing his face level with hers. Up close, his cologne was sharp, expensive, and underneath it she could smell champagne on his breath, the particular sourness of a man who had already begun celebrating a victory he did not yet understand. He'd lost. "Kuiswang," he said, and then catching himself, switched back, smiling at his own joke. "Down, now." She did not go down. Her spine held straight as the day she'd first walked into his life carrying nothing but a laptop and an idea worth more than either of them knew. Sarah's breath caught somewhere high in her throat. She thought of the drive sitting in her clutch purse, cold silver against her palm. Thought of the promise she had made to Mary 2 nights ago in a stairwell nobody else knew about. Not yet Mary had told her. Not until the room is full. Not until every one of them is watching. The napkin sat between them. James straightened, and for the crowd's benefit, he laughed again, though this time it came out thinner, stretched over something that sounded almost like need. "Nothing," he said. "Of course. She'd rather stand in her own filth than admit where she belongs." Mary lifted her chin. She did not speak. Something in James's jaw tightened, that half-degree twitch Mary had spent 3 years cataloging, the one that appeared only when a room was slipping out of his hands and he could feel it going. He turned from her, sharply waved a hand toward the string section, as if commanding the music itself, and strode toward the aisle where his groomsmen waited, tuxedos gleaming under the chandelier light like teeth. Mary stood alone by the ruined napkin. She did not bend to retrieve it. She let it lie there white against black stone, a small monument to everything he had just done in front of 200 witnesses who would remember later that they had said nothing. Sarah Mitchell wiped her eyes with the back of one gloved hand quick before anyone could see, and in that small motion something inside her finally closed a door she had kept ajar for years out of loyalty to a brother who no longer deserved the word. The orchestra swelled louder, urging the room toward its seats, toward vows that would never be spoken, toward an ending none of them could yet imagine. Mary bent at last, not for the napkin, but to smooth the front of her coat, wine-stained sleeve torn slightly at the cuff. The same coat she had worn through 3 years of nights that had built the fortune now paying for the flowers around her. She looked once toward Sarah. Sarah looked back and nodded, barely the smallest motion in the world, and somewhere inside her clutch purse, the silver drive waited patient 10 minutes from changing everything. Father Robert Bennett raised both hands, and the ballroom fell into the particular hush reserved for sacred things. "If anyone here objects to this union," he said, his voice carrying easily to the farthest chandelier, "let them speak now or forever hold their peace." The question was ceremonial. Everyone in the room understood it as ceremonial, a formality wedged between vows and rings, a moment meant to pass unclaimed. Sarah Mitchell stepped out of the bridesmaid's line. Her heel struck marble once, twice, and the sound carried further than it should have because nothing else in the room was moving at all. James Anderson turned, first confusion flickering across his face before something harder replaced it. "Sarah," he said low, a warning dressed as her name. "Sit down." She kept walking. Patricia Wells's bouquet trembled in her grip, white petals shivering against green stems, and behind her veil her eyes went wide, searching the crowd for some explanation that wasn't coming. Sarah reached the edge of the aisle where the AV table sat half-hidden behind a floral arrangement technicians assigned to run slideshow tributes and background music. Nothing more. She reached into her clutch. Her fingers found the drive cold and small, exactly where it had waited for 2 nights. "Sarah." James's voice cracked, now no longer performing for anyone. "I am warning you." She did not look at him. The drive slid into the port with a small definitive click, a sound no louder than a held breath, and yet it seemed to fill the entire ballroom. For 1 second, nothing happened. Then the wall above the altar, 20 feet of white marble, built for wedding photographs, filled instead with light. Server logs bloomed across the stone in stark black text timestamps stretching back 3 years, each line a small, undeniable record of code written by hands that were not James Anderson's. Beside them, financial transfers scrolled in neat columns, offshore accounts numbers with more zeros than any groom salary should carry. And beneath all of it, message threads James's own name attached words meant for Patricia Wells, written months before his divorce from Mary had even been finalized. The room did not gasp this time. The room simply stopped. 200 guests stared upward at 20 feet of undeniable truth. champagne glasses forgotten in slack hands, and somewhere near the back, a woman's phone clattered unnoticed to the floor. James spun toward the screen, toward the wall, toward the version of himself now hanging above the altar in text too large to argue with. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. Patricia's bouquet slipped from her fingers and struck the marble with a soft, final sound, white petals scattering across black stone like something already mourned. Mary Thompson stood exactly where she had stood all evening, near the back, coat still stained, hands folded, watching not the screen but James's face, cataloging this too, filing it beside everything else. Father Robert Bennett lowered his prayer book slowly, his eyes climbing the wall of evidence with the particular stillness of a man recalculating everything he thought he knew about the union he was meant to bless. "That's not a server error," Sarah said, and her voice, when it finally came, did not shake at all. "That's not a glitch, James. That's 3 years of you stealing a woman's life and calling it your own." James turned on her fury, replacing shock, replacing everything. "You have no idea what you've just done." "I know exactly what I've done." Sarah's chin lifted, and for the first time all evening she looked nothing like the bridesmaid who had spent years swallowing silence for his sake. "I've done what I should have done 3 years ago." Somewhere behind her a guest rose from a chair, then another chair, scraping in slow, deliberate succession, a sound that had not existed in this room until this exact moment. The wall of evidence kept scrolling patient, methodical transfer after transfer, message after message. A machine that had waited 3 years to speak and now would not stop until it was finished. James Anderson stood alone at the altar, tuxedo, still immaculate, $100,000 fabric catching chandelier light, while above him his entire life burned in 20 feet of unforgiving text. Nobody moved to comfort him. Nobody moved toward the door either, not yet, though the air had already begun to shift, a slow collective intake of breath before something larger than a wedding finally broke loose in that room. The messages kept scrolling. Patricia Wells stood frozen at the altar veil, trembling as her own name appeared in threads dated months before the divorce papers had even been filed. Then came the ones dated weeks after the engagement, James's words laid bare across marble. "Once the merger closes, I won't need her name on anything anymore." Patricia's breath caught. She turned to James, slow, disbelieving. "What is he talking about?" James didn't answer. His eyes were still fixed on the wall, watching his own sentences hang above 200 witnesses like a verdict already delivered. "James!" Patricia's voice climbed sharp, now cutting through the orchestra's dying notes. "What merger? What accounts? What is this?" "It's nothing," James said. "It's doctored. It's federal wire fraud," Sarah said quietly from the aisle. "That's what the last folder is labeled. I didn't write that." "You did." Patricia's bouquet was already gone. Petals scattered across the marble behind her, and now something else in her seemed to scatter too. She looked at the dress she wore, $15,000 of silk and lace, and for the first time all evening it seemed to weigh on her like a costume rather than a crown. "You told me the company was clean," she said. "You told me we were clean. Patricia, you were going to leave me the second the money cleared." Her voice cracked on the word leave, cracked further on the word money, and around them 200 guests watched a marriage dissolve seconds before it had even begun. Mary Thompson watched from the back of the room, still silent, hands folded over the ruined coat. She felt nothing like triumph. She felt only the strange, hollow quiet of watching a house of cards she had built the foundation for finally understand its own architecture. Near the front row, a man in a charcoal suit rose from his seat first. He did not speak. He simply straightened his jacket, turned, and began walking toward the doors. A second guest followed, then a third. The sound of chairs scraping against marble multiplied, no longer isolated, a slow avalanche of movement rippling backward through the ballroom. 200 people who had spent the entire evening swallowing their discomfort, now finally standing to let it go. James turned in a full circle, taking in the exodus, his face shifting from fury to something rawer, something closer to fear. "Wait," he said to no one, to everyone. "This isn't, you don't understand the context." Nobody stopped. Nobody looked back. She shrugged the ruined coat from her shoulders, wine-stained fabric sliding free, and let it fall into a trash bin beside the entrance without ceremony, without hesitation, the way one discards something that has finally, completely finished its purpose. Behind her, an agent's voice read James's rights flat and procedural, each word landing on him with the same weight as everything the wall above the altar had already said. Mary stepped out into the night. The cold air met her bare arms, sharp and clean, after hours of perfume and marble, and for the first time in 3 years she felt nothing pulling at her chest. No weight, no debt owed to a man who had once convinced her that her own name belonged on his company's foundation and nowhere else. Behind the hotel's grand doors, James Anderson was led out through a service entrance, still in his tuxedo, hands bound past the wreckage of a wedding that would be remembered by everyone who had witnessed it and repeated by no one who wanted to be associated with it. He had lost the company. He had lost the bride. He had lost every guest whose approval he had spent a decade cultivating, and he would lose in the months ahead the freedom he had never once imagined could be taken from a man of his position. Mary Thompson walked to the curb alone, unhurried, and did not look back at the hotel's glowing windows. Somewhere behind her, the ballroom stood empty chandeliers, still burning over abandoned chairs, and crushed white petals, a monument to an ending that had been written the moment James Anderson first decided her silence meant surrender. It hadn't. It never had.
Have you ever had to grit your teeth through the blows while the whole room stayed complicit, in silence? Though this story is fiction, the truth about reclaiming power is something that happens every single day. My grandmother used to say the truth always outlives every ridiculous act. Leave a comment. Tell us how you once stood up to someone who abused their power. Subscribe to support a justice system that never turns a blind eye.